All right, welcome to the Goat Rodeo Podcast. I'm Garrett Smith, your host. I'm joined by regular co-hosts Dave Cottle and Simon Kuhn. We all work at the same company together. This week, we have a special guest. We've been promising a fourth wheel co-host edition on a rotating basis. This week, we've got Ari Schuler, who's the CEO at Goat, also a DHS civilian veteran by background. We're going to dig into some of that through the course of the conversation. But this is the podcast where we seek to riff and dialogue and snark on the topic of defense technology innovation at the crossroads of venture capital, geopolitics, and everything else in between. So I wanted to start off with maybe one thing. We've started the podcast by saying that we're never going to do ads, never do ad reads. We don't want sponsorships. We want this to be clean. That being said, I will take a sponsorship from Rip It. For those of you who know, you know. For those of you who don't, Simon, would you care to enlighten us on...
If you have any friends in the Rip It Corporation, please let me know. I have specific flavor preferences, cans that I would like to collect.
I don't think there's something called the Rip It Corporation. Maybe there is a Rip It Corporation, but I think
there is in my mind.
National Beverage Corporation. I just looked it up. Same company that owns Shasta, LaCroix and some other stuff. So, yeah, LaCroix. Yeah. So this is the other
margins
classy,
have got to be phenomenal in that company.
The other classy drink edition. Okay, Simon got his piece in there. Dave, can you tell us what is a Rip It? Why are we talking about this at all?
A Rip It is probably one of the best things to ever come out of the defense acquisition system or ecosystem, which was
preach.
We have hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the Middle East, and they need their energy drinks. And who can bid the lowest or produce, I don't know, quantity 3 million energy drinks for our infantrymen.
If you're the DOD acquisitions professional that brought Rip It on contract and you'd like to be featured on a semi-professional podcast, please reach out. We are the phone lines are open.
It's what fueled all combat operations for all of the global war on terror.
100%. I stepped off the ramp of the C-17 at Kandahar Airfield, and the first thing I saw was the biggest pallet of Rip It energy drinks I've ever seen in my life. It was massive, and it was next to the water that was coming in on pallets. There was more Rip It than water coming in. It was more important to us in theater than basically any other form of sustenance. It was awesome.
Garrett, I was at a combat outpost that required container delivery system for all of our sustenance. Like there was no ground route open, so they would drop all of our sustenance out of C-17s, including our fuel. And so, you do this, security perimeter and the parachutes drop and you're running out to collect all the stuff from the pallets and loading it up. And the soldiers
ammunition, but there's ammunition and food and
ammo,
medical
fuel, like everything we need to literally survive. And all of my infantrymen go directly to make sure the Rip It pallet survives.
Totally.
Right? Because about a quarter of those things would burn. Oh, the Rip It's okay.
So for everyone's awareness there, dropping things out of an airplane is more art than science. And I don't care what anyone tells you. You got a 1 in 4 odds that pallet's just going to turn into dust.
Yep. It's 25%. Yep.
So quick question though for the civilian on the group. What is the secret ingredient to Rip It? Like what was
Caffeine.
Is it the taurine? Was it
battery acid?
That's what I was going at.
I have no idea. It was wildly addictive. My main complaint about Rip It was that they seemed to always come in like half cans. I wanted full cans. I wanted bigger cans. I wanted like monster size cans of Rip It, and they would not deliver that.
That's probably an FDA thing. When they cut the snack size for the calories, it's like the amount in a full can would kill you.
I don't know.
If you live near a NASCAR raceway like Simon does, you can get full size Rip Its at the convenience stores.
Really?
The monster size cans.
I like the half cans because you take your Gatorade, you drink half the Gatorade, you pour the Rip It in it, you got a Ripperade. You've got your your electrolytes, your caffeine, your hydration. That's everything you need for a combat patrol.
And they also are great for throwing.
They are really great for throwing.
That might have been the half can.
That
might have been a
perfect
requirement.
size baseball of energy and hate.
Yeah. Rip It, I don't think is distributed to where I live out here in Montana. Maybe it is. Somebody can clue me in if you're listening and know where I can source some Rip Its in state. If not, I might consider buying the distribution rights to the state and opening up like a Rip It distribution operation out here. Ari, I don't know if during your time at DHS and CBP in the innovation and acquisition ecosystem you ever considered acquiring Ripits and fielding it to your folks. But if not, maybe we can drop that seed when we're all in DC this week.
Yeah, Monster was the for the special response teams, who were responsible for the commissioner's security. That was the go-to. There were a lot of Monster connoisseurs. I always found it to be a little too jittery, personally. Celsius has become the drink of choice around here.
Sure. Yeah, lots of copycats.
It's natural.
There's only one original though. It's spelled RIPIT.
Yeah.
Ari, I think everybody knows us fairly well. Simon and I, Marine veterans. Simon, a veteran of Capitol Hill post Marine Corps. Dave, Army veteran, the consummate go-to-marketeer. Let's hear a bit about you, just so that we can get to know you and our listeners can learn a bit about your background. I think what we teased at the beginning was veteran of DHS on the civilian side, and now running Gotenna. Do you want to just give us the rundown?
Yeah, absolutely, and really appreciate the kind words on last week's episode, and also just the depth of knowledge on my old agency, which, as you all were talking about, not always common to have the DOD to CBP connection, and you all were talking to and naming names that I remember. So unlike yourselves, who jumped in after 9/11 in uniform, that was not a path for me. So my decade in the 2000s was actually at a startup that had spun out of DARPA and gotten venture capital funding. And at the time, it was Palantir, SpaceX, and this startup. I think I chose poorly on my career, but I did get a chance to get the experience of learning government and learning startup, which in the 2000s really was limited to Palantir and SpaceX. 2010s jumped into government, which is something I'd always wanted to do. Spent some time first at DHS's Science and Technology Directorate in their front office, and then moved on to U.S. Customs, where I founded the innovation team, which again, thank you for the kind words last week. And our goal of the innovation team, and this was right when Raj Shah was rebooting DIU, is we knew we did not have the money that DOD would have, and we never would. But what we realized was it was something like, and this stat's probably wrong, but like from the DOD secretary down to the warfighter were 13 layers. Conversely, at CBP, it was 6 layers from the commissioner to a border patrol agent or a customs officer. And so we realized we had a really unique advantage to be the first fastest customer. We were never going to be the giant customer. We weren't going to have the billions of dollars of DOD. But as we all know in the startup world, particularly when you're doing defense only, your investors want to know, is an officer, agent, warfighter using your stuff? Is it actually being used in operations? Not a SIBR, not RD&T, that's all nice, but they want to know, is their product market fit? And so we set out to be the best at that. And obviously our claim to fame was meeting the founding team of Anduril 3 days after they incorporated, fielding them on the border 12 months later. But we did that for a lot of companies. We were first customers of Echodyne, one of the first for Shield AI initially, early in their creation. Data Robot, Wicker, can go on. And so just an incredible experience to learn how to do that, how to support startups, because I think we're all here. Look, we're on the private sector, but we all have mission experience. We know that the guys and the gals on the front line don't have the best they could have. And we're all here to try to fix that in our own ways.
Yeah. And obviously an awesome background and one that slots in really nicely to our recurring conversation topics around how should young companies think about penetrating government with what kinds of tech and how to go about it and all that stuff. And we'll dig into all of the above a bit more, but a quick backgrounder on Gotenna for those who don't know anything about Gotenna. You want to rip on
real
Gotenna
fast, not a paid read, but a little context. Gotenna, we bring secure, interoperable comms anywhere on the planet with no external infrastructure. So our customers use us for everything from dropping into an OCONUS mission where you've got to do a thing, kind of the work you guys did, and you don't have networks you can rely on, you don't have infrastructure you can rely on, you need to build your own, you need to build one that is low RF and allows you to do what you need to do. Or it could be post-disaster relief. You're rolling into a town that's had power and comms devastated. You need a way to coordinate aid, coordinate aircraft. If you're dropping an aid, make sure the aid does not fall on the wrong things. As you said, it's 1 in 4. So we get used all over the world to bring secure, interoperable networks and give warfighters, public safety, and law enforcement another comms edge to help them get home safely.
So it appears that, you guys have maybe experienced the most traction within the non-DOD federal law enforcement and law enforcement adjacent communities, DHS and CBP, your old stomping ground. I believe you guys were awarded a StratFi contract in recent memory, last cycle, perhaps right alongside our company. And then also you've received a relatively high cap IDIQ contract vehicle with CBP to deliver at scale, something like $100 million of ceiling on that contract vehicle. Can you tell us a bit about like maybe the experience of going to market there, but maybe specifically just to tug on like a recent news article, kind of a hot topic nowadays, like how's this DOGE thing affecting going to market, as the efficiency engine kind of calls through federal workforce? Is this impacting DHS, CBP, kind of your main customer set?
Yeah, and you all were talking about that last week. And look, I think DOGE is everywhere. Talking to folks I know in DHS and in CBP, DOGE has come in as well. But I think one of the commonalities that we're seeing, and I'm curious if you're seeing as well, is there is an emphasis on the warfighter and the operator. My understanding is their engagement at DHS and CBP has been, okay, what are the contracts we have? How are they directly supporting a frontline operator, right? Is this a tower climber who, highly specialized, literally climbs towers to install surveillance gear, GoTenas, whatever, or is this someone who is making PowerPoints all day? And look, PowerPoints are important. They're the currency of the land. We all work in the government. We love our briefings. But I think there's a big difference in the impact. And those are good questions to ask. I mean, there's plenty of PowerPoints that need to be made, and I'm not joking about that. But I do think this hard look is important. But I also think it's important to note that it's not sparing any agency, right? And I'd say it's kind of like you have all discussed on this podcast. Some people like parts of it. Some people hate other parts of it. There's no one size fits all here, I think, on either end.
DOGE seems to have maybe impacted DHS far less than other federal agencies, maybe on a percentage basis. Am I right about that?
They were exempt from the initial buyouts, which honestly, not every manager liked that. I think there were, people who would have preferred it be applied uniformly. But my understanding is, and again, I'm not an expert, I don't work there anymore. But my understanding is they were exempt from the buyouts. I think there's less scrutiny, but I think that's true. DHS is an interesting spot, and I think we'll get into it because you have big budgets, but compared to the DOD, you have much, much smaller budgets, right? Not insignificant at all, but not, pushing $1 trillion. So I think there's been this mix of, hey, there's things we need to fix here, but maybe not as dramatically as other agencies. And whether that's good, bad, and different, I think is above my pay grade.
Simon, I think like we talked about this last week, but DHS seems to have been impacted on a percentage basis far less than other agencies, entire agencies getting shut down or, 100% of headcount, kind of like whatever. USAID comes to mind as maybe the marquee example, but Department of Education's been on the chopping block recently. A number of other things. I mean, is this a trend line that you think eventually negatively impacts the DHS umbrella and all of its subordinate agencies to CBP and others?
So it's a little tricky to characterize because I honestly think that the Trump admin is very explicitly trying to reshape all of the old norms. So even if they do some pretty substantial damage to either the headcount or the top line budget of what DHS normally sits on, or more specifically to what I think we're really talking about, which is CBP, there's also going to be really large infusions of resources from new angles that are going to offset and just look different. So I think it's going to shrink in some ways and grow in others. And I don't think we really know just yet what the top line picture looks like. My guess is it's a little bit smaller everywhere. But I think for the mission focused folks that we're most oriented towards, it probably looks a lot better. I think it looks like more prioritization, and it looks like a much heavier focus on those people that are out in the field doing the work, and a much more budget constrained environment for folks that are, back in the HQ, or potentially, and this is a potential negative, doing the acquisitions and contracting work.
And yeah. Simon, you mentioned this last week, and I think we'll see how it plays out, but reconciliation is yet to be determined. And I think what's interesting, particularly for DHS, and I worked there almost a decade, and hasn't changed, is, back to that budget point, DHS, I think, is like $50 billion budget-ish. DOD is, like I said, pushing $1 trillion. You guys probably know the exact number. But then when you look at tech spend, it's wildly different. DHS is very operational, very ONS, cops, Coast Guard, et cetera. But we haven't seen the tech spend on the security and public safety side keep pace with the threat the way it has on the DOD and the IC. And the reality is, sophisticated transnational criminal organizations, they are not held back by whether we've caught up or not, right? Like, when you have very sophisticated hackers and it's a law enforcement response, like, hackers don't care that, DHS doesn't have the funding to deal with them, that's actually a plus for them. And so I think there is, to your point, Simon, and the dust has to settle, and the ships could fall a lot of different ways. There's a really interesting opportunity here to drive a lot more capability to an agency, as you all were discussing last week, has historically not had as much technology infused in it, has not had as much attention as other agencies have in the past.
The trend lines there that I would be watching if I'm running a company that's trying to sell tech into these spaces is DOGE, obviously, right? Or you need to be watching where DOGE is reducing footprints and headcounts, because those are going to be more difficult places to interact with. And then B, I'm watching two parts of reconciliation, one of which is the money that's going to flow directly to DHS CBP, and the other is the DOD money that can flow to Northcom and Southcom. I think it'll be interesting to see how well Northcom, Southcom, and DHS can sort of deconflict and spread those resources around on the border to solve problems. But there's going to be multiple pots of money in this geographic operating environment, but they're going to be put into different buckets as far as colors of money by Congress.
Ari, Dave, I don't know who's best to answer this question, but maybe just a bit of backgrounder. This is going to betray my ignorance. How much overlap, interoperability, combined operations actually occur, or joint operations, I don't know if that is joint or combined or something else, between DHS entities, call it Coast Guard or Customs and Border Protection, and Northcom assets, which I'm assuming would be military, like DOD entities deployed to and around the Northcom AOR, which includes some border stuff, but certainly includes other things in that AOR. What's the level of historical interoperability or combined or joint operations going on there?
I'll let Dave speak to it first, because I think he's got better up-to-date knowledge, and then I think maybe I can add some color from the last Trump administration when I was in CBP and got to see some of the collaboration or lack thereof firsthand.
Yeah, I think I think historically there's a Northcom, JTF North, there's a room and there's people and there's computers and there's sometimes challenging collaboration. I think in the last couple of months, we've watched it get much more significant to where we now have like combat units, Army units, National Guard units that are customers of ours that we talk to that are collaborating or, are partnered up with DHS or Customs and Border Protection agents all the way down to like the squad or individual soldier level, which I don't know that I've ever seen before, but, back over to Ari for his perspective.
Well, sorry to interrupt, and Ari, pick this thread up wherever you want to, but like what, is there a thread to pull on that talks to equipping across those kind of combined, those task force, so there's some amount of interoperability or even like sameness of kit across that boundary?
Yeah, so I think, I think it'd probably be helpful to get Ari's perspective on this. From our customers' perspective, they've got a couple of options, right? So, Northcom is a geographic combatant command. As we shift towards, more resources for the combatant commands, obviously that's going to be one of the winners, as is probably Indo-PACOM. So there are more resources there at the geographic command. JTF North and the actual units that are assigned to that mission or to the southern border or what have you are experiencing a lot of increased at the agency level or at the Department of the Army level. It looks like FORSCOM, a lot more resources like operation maintenance budget and training budget, et cetera. So the actual units that are deploying down there have much more both flexibility and funding than they have had in the past to equip for that mission. But there seems to be a little bit of confusion, at least on our direct customer side, of who is really the lead on making sure you have, for instance, for Ari, like interoperable comms platforms. Like, who is running the tax server? Is that GTF? Is that JTF North? Is that Customs and Border Protection? Is that the 18th Airborne Corps unit that's assigned to the border? Like, who's in charge of making sure all of these things are going to work together? And who's really taking the lead on what the needs are from a technology or kit perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, there's a couple threads to pull there, and love to get everyone's take on this. But first off, we're 2.5 months into this administration. It may have felt longer for a lot of reasons. A lot has happened, but it's still very, very nascent. When you think about that, especially the speed of government, there's making sure it's open source. There's an memorandum between CBP and Texas DPS, for example, that recently got signed. which happened pretty quickly in government speed, right? But you would wonder why it didn't happen faster. And I think part of this at a political level was, the first Trump administration, the border became a hot topic, obviously, but it wasn't as big of a campaign topic. It wasn't, as contested an election. Like, I think everyone knew going in, hey, the border's going to change, right? Like it or hate it, like there are no surprises here. And so to your point, Dave, there's a lot more will across the interagency to make this a priority. And I think like the phase one of this is, show presence, right? You've got numbers dropping of border crossings. You have a lot more activity. You're showing that this is a thing. I think the next logical phase we'll start to see is exactly what you said, which is, okay, how do we pool resources? How do we ensure interoperability? What assets can we share? There's a zillion more MOUs to be signed. The lawyers will be kept very busy because of all the different Title 8 versus 50 versus whatever that you've got to go do. I think that's going to happen next. I personally, just because I think the cartels are quite abominable. Like, when you look at the human misery they traffic in, no one crosses that border without paying a cartel, and the numbers of what the cartels have taken in is astronomical. And the lawlessness that breeds is just, it needs to be stopped. And so I think you need to have a sustained and logical approach to this. If this just ends up being hey, we got some units down at the border and then stop, like that's failure. But if we have a more cohesive reshaping of NORTHCOM and SOUTHCOM, how law enforcement fits in, ensure that, civil rights are protected, proper due process is followed, like that, I think is an admirable goal at the end. A lot of steps from here to there, though.
Dave, let's pull you in and talk a bit about the topic you've raised a couple of times in previous recordings, which is authorities and perhaps budget being routed to combatant commands as opposed to, program offices. But maybe first, before we do that, what's the front door, Ari, for young companies or investors who are considering investing in young companies? What's the front door? What's the way to access DHS with like an innovative new technology?
You guys hit it last week. You knocked it out of the park. There's the Silicon Valley Innovation Program, which is designed for early stage companies. It's out of S&T. They have some pretty strict revenue gaps. Like, they really are looking for very early stage companies, but I think they have a really clean process. For CBP, it is through their business connection portal, which is online, and it is real. It's sort of their version of, they probably wouldn't like me to say this, it's their version of speed dating. That's better than what I was going to say. And it lets them link up program offices with companies, and you have to go through that. But then there's, of course, my old team is a big tip of the spear there, the CBP innovation team. But I think CBP's procurement and small business engagement, and it's by the numbers as you all had, like 40% or something like that, is really superb. It's not to say it's perfect. No government agency is, but I think the agency punches far above its weight when it comes to helping startups get early traction.
It's the government's version of Tinder. Is that what you were going to say?
I might have been about to say that, but thank you for saying it for me.
Yeah, you bet. You got it. I'll take it.
So, Dave, you were going to say.
So I was basically going to ask Garrett the same question, but so if you have a thing, if you're a defense tech startup or technology startup in this space, you have a thing that's relevant to southern border operations, and you're trying to figure out sort of your best bets. My assumption is all those front doors that you just listed, and you're going to go engage with the user community, the actual agents, federal law enforcement sort of community that's down there on the southern border. I think that I am also probably suggesting that it looks like a stop at Fort Huachuca is also appropriate, right? It looks like the amount of attention and military resources that we're sending down there, and then the authorities that we're assigning the Geographic Combatant Command and the resourcing, the funding that we're assigning them, and also down to it looks like to the unit level. I guess I'm making I guess the suggestion that I would make is, I think you can probably sell border capabilities, or like capabilities that are relevant to the southern border, to the United States military units that are involved. Would you agree with that assertion,
Dave? When you reference Fort Huachuca, can you just maybe clarify that a little bit? Like, what is that referencing?
Yeah, sorry. Fort Huachuca is the headquarters for Joint Task Force North. They work for U.S. Northern Command. And as far as Ari's more knowledgeable here, but for southern border operations that they're directing the flow of U.S. military's involvement, I think that's all directed out of Fort Huachuca. I just have to make a correction. I stated earlier that JTF North was at Fort Huachuca. I had conflated that with a new task force that is Huachuca, focused on the southern border, so that JTF North can keep doing its good work with combating transnational crime and that sort of thing. And it is based out of Fort Bliss, Texas. So I just didn't want to get noted like crazy.
Got it.
Also, some drone and counter drone testing facilities there historically, if I recall. I not to turn around back to you all. I think you can, but I think you raise a really interesting point, and you did last week as well, is what is the front door? Because there's a lot of different units on the border right now. I saw the list at one point, but it's, Army Corps is there, a lot of military police units. I think the 82nd has a presence down there or had a presence. These are all very different elements of the DOD that you all, frankly, could educate everyone, listeners on better than I can. And I don't know that all of them, being fair, have the right RDT&E support either, right? I don't know, military police, incredibly important function, but I don't think I've ever seen a DIU solicitation supporting them, right? Have you?
Yes. Yeah, it's
right.
Really, it's really there's not some major program executive office for active duty infantry and MPs doing domestic operations, right? To give them the appropriate kit to do that mission and support the southern border. So I think part of the conversation that we were overhearing or participating in last week through a series of conferences of how to solve this and similar problems was, it's all sort of the same problem, and let's drive down authorities, requirements generation, requirements validation, and funding to the lowest tactical echelon. So I think that we're very quickly trending in a direction where 06s or about the full bird kernel level are going to generate, validate, and under the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000, execute the kit that they need. So if you're a brigade commander from the 82nd, you're on the southern border, and you realize that you don't have a radio that can communicate or show the disposition of CBP agents and your soldiers, that you can address that by building a requirement, validating it, and buying things.
So here's the thing. I think we all are familiar with the phrase, you are your own best advocate. But I find it to be the peak of comedy that the DOD would push down the authority and let the infantry solve their own problems before they ever make the attempt to just acquire and do things for the infantry the same way that they do for F-35s and yada, yada, yadas. I'm glad to see it. I'm happy for it, but all I can think in my brain is this God,
came out of...
We can't buy Simon, stuff for you. Buy your own stuff.
This came out of... But this came... You know where this comes from. This comes from robotic and autonomous systems, right? What happened was the U.S. military, the U.S. Army, DIU, everybody went, hey, Ukraine, and hey, very special places within U.S. SOCOM that have been able to keep pace with the development of robotic systems over time. How have you done it? And the Ukrainians and the software operators all said the same thing, which is remove the bureaucracy, give me authority, give me funding, and stand back and be impressed. I think the only skepticism that I have is not everybody has that pressure, that threat, that need that Ukraine has, and not everybody has the expertise that some of the elite soft units have in these systems. So I'm a little interested how that actually plays out in the conventional forces. I think you're going to get a mixed bag. I think that some of the units with good leadership and very talented soldiers are going to absolutely knock it out of the park, and they're going to weaponeer capabilities that are very relevant to any mission set, whether it's southern border or otherwise. And I think you're going to have some units that are going to go out and burn and waste a ton of money. And I think we just have to be okay with accepting that risk.
Dave, do you think that I can imagine 06s, general officers, flag officers getting really anxious about this idea of interoperability between disparate units that are buying different things, right? And the warping that happens at the individual brigade, battalion level on doctrine and TTPs and all that stuff. Are we sacrificing some of those things, like uniformity across the force and interoperability, in the interest of rapid innovation and figuring that problem out, and crowdsourcing, solutions to this? And then eventually it ends up centralizing again. What do you think actually happens there?
I don't know if everybody at DIU would agree with this statement, but I think that what DIU has been saying for a couple of years is we don't want to equip the entire force, and we don't want to be we don't want to be responsible for giving everybody the best interoperable radio. What we do want to do is just establish and publish some general left and right limits of it has to be interoperable with CBP's TAC server. It has to, use this communication protocol, whatever. Here's the list. Here's the shopping list of things that you can go and buy, 06 Commander. So here's the blue the blue UAS list. Here's the cleared drones. Here's the cleared comms networks. Here's the set of capabilities that you can go out and buy. But what you're going to piece together and what you're going to prioritize amongst that is in line with your priorities, your medal, and your mission.
Okay, so if we've kind of honed in on the front door for non-DOD federal, specifically DHS and CBP, as Ari described, And we think that the future of some elements of equipping and acquisitions will look like authorities and budget being pushed to combatant commands or even down into like brigade or regiment or battalion level echelons. What are we recommending for people looking to build a go-to-market kind of team or strategy here? Like that sounds like a bunch of, a fragmented market, and it's a risky set of bets to make. Is that how you see it?
Yeah. So it pains me to say it, right? Because I trade on business development. I trade on the fact that the defense acquisition system, the way that clock works, or the way that sometimes it doesn't work. So it pains me to say it, but I think that a good bet or a good hedge right now would be to start acting more like a traditional sales apparatus than let's move the entire mountain in the Department of Defense and do like major programmatic adoption moves, go after the golden goose or program of record, and hire more direct technical salespeople that can go out on the range, engage with, from Customs and Border Protection to SOF operators to the users that brigade commander cares about.
And that may sound, I think, like a almost oxymoronic, right? The idea that you need to look more like a traditional anything. But I think this is what everybody's been pushing for, and it is for a more free market capitalist version of sales and acquisitions within DoD, which means the people selling into it need to look more like free market capitalist businesses and not bespoke government dole seekers, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we as a company decided that we wanted to expand or treat as expansion markets this non-duty federal space, DHS, et cetera, but also the international military and public safety markets. Similar to how there's friction and uncertainty and upheaval and change going on in the United States, federal market place, we're experiencing some of those same things overseas. Dave, you mentioned a couple of weeks ago getting off the phone with a UK customer who had somewhat of an interesting, not quite positive, maybe even fully negative message for us. I won't recap this. I'll cede the mic to you.
Yeah. Just to recap it, I guess, really briefly, we had a European customer. We had a well-scoped project. The user community was excited about it. And the unfortunate outcome of that call was, this is all about the conflict in Europe, and we're not sure if you as in United States of America or U.S. military or the U.S. military's defense industrial base are going to be good or reliable partners in supporting us going forward. And our preference at the moment would be to try to find a vendor or a technology firm that could do this work and build these things that we need that are over here in Europe.
So that's one of those things that I beat the horse on a little bit. But if you're going to be in this government space, you do need to be keeping an eye on these like larger national and international geopolitical trade winds, because as these more isolationist policies come into play, both in America and internationally, they're going to be looking to spend their money domestically. They're going to be standing up domestic companies to fill these gaps. That's not to say that I don't think there's any opportunity here, but it's something to keep in mind as you're approaching these markets.
Ari, have you had a similar experience that I've had recently?
I have. And I won't say the country, but it was a similar experience where it was just there's a cooling of wanting to work with us, which is understandable, right? When you have adversaries in your backyard and you feel that there's, wind shifting, I can understand that. I think the challenge in this space, and I think this is maybe a broader topic for the group, is, look, this is a messy business we're in, right? Like, military, public safety, law enforcement is hard. I mean, you were talking about your product could be the difference of someone living or dying, and you all have done that mission. I haven't, but I've been adjacent to it. Like, this stuff's not easy. You guys were talking about, I thought this was really interesting last week. You were talking about how there's certain countries you won't sell to, nor will we, no matter what the export classification, because we're not an ITAR controlled technology. But that's actually, to me, the easy decision. The hard decision is what about the, dictatorships that we routinely ally with, as a nation? And
Saudi. Saudi, UAE, et cetera, et cetera.
What do you do when you sell your gear there and your gear is used lawfully in accordance with their own laws and their own government structure, to put down civil unrest? Then what? And to me, those are the harder conversations. And so I understand when our allies see a political shift, they don't like it. We all, being small businesses, get caught up in the churn. But I think to your point, Simon and Dave, and I think we're all in agreement, is like you have to have a diversified pipeline. You've got to make sure, I think, your domestic business comes first, because you're always going to be at the whims of the international, and you're going to have more control domestically, whether that's through congressional representation, whether it's through working, with customers directly. Because the reality is, I think those customers will come around, in a non arrogant way. I think both of our companies have unique technologies in the world. And eventually, if our customers really need that capability, they'll get back to that point. We see it all the time. I'm sure you do too. But in the short term, we got quarters to make, right? And it goes both ways, because we see this experience, you see this experience. I suspect you're like, you know what? That next headcount's not going to international. It's going to go to FedCiv, because we think FedCiv is growing. It's more repeatable. It's safer. But guess what? In 4 years, just like we saw the last 4 years, maybe FedCiv isn't as good again. And so the cycle goes. And to your point, Simon, you've always got to have your eye on what's changing.
Simon and I are going to be on Capitol Hill this week, engaged on an industry roundtable with the House Foreign Affairs Committee on a foreign military sales task force discussion topic. And I'm guessing all of these discussion points that we're covering here are going to feature in that conversation. Simon, do you have any kind of outlook on what Capitol Hill and Congress are thinking when it comes to foreign military aid, et cetera, et cetera?
I think there was a really strong signal coming out of the Ukraine conflict that companies need to be able to navigate the foreign military sales pipeline faster.
Yep.
I think we found that we had an infrastructure that wasn't really ready to turn the spigot on at the speed of conflict, so to speak. It's somewhat ironic that as we're winding down there, we're I think really starting to make some strides at that policy and congressional level to ungum the works, so to speak. But that's not to say that there won't be more conflicts in the future and there won't be more need for this. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'll be interested to see how much of this kind of conversation about the cooling effects actually comes up in that roundtable.
One of the learning points from the venture industry, like the venture-backed industry, the venture capital allocator, types, is that dual use is probably the way of the future, right? And so if and by dual use, I mean technologies that can be commercialized outside of a government market, right? You could sell it to enterprise, private business. You could sell it to anybody, basically, right? And so, Ari, to your point about diversified pipelines, I think the dual use nature of a technology not only allows you to commercialize more effectively and quickly overseas, because you're not blocked by ITAR munition list, type export control restrictions, but you can also commercialize it across a greater TAM in commercial markets.
But I'd push back on that a little bit in that, dual use sounds great and technology can be dual use, but startups struggle to be dual focus. And
yes,
particularly
true.
If you're going to take on the government, as soon as you start introducing commercial, a lot, depending on who your cap table is, a lot of them be like, this government stuff sucks. Like, why are you wasting your time, right? And or vice versa. But when we look at our the ecosystem we operate in, some pretty big valuations and substantial money being raised on technologies that are exclusively for defense and security.
Yeah, it's true. I'm not gonna name names here, but I've had multiple conversations with some investors who claim to be operating at the early stage, right? And whose main complaint for our EAR 99, technology was, you're not dual use enough. And I was like, I don't understand what you mean. We have customers, not just in US DOD and other militaries, but also the public safety market. Also, we have some pilots and other things. And we were not dual use enough. And what they really meant was that you are not demonstrating enough go-to-market traction in these two very different kind of slices of the broad market. And I maybe at the later stage that's more appropriate, like maybe a Series C investor or a Series D investor, that's a good right criticism to level at a company that has a so-called dual use technology. But if an investor is pressuring a young company, in its first couple of years to split focus, to your point, to split focus and go after multiple end user personas through multiple disparate sales channels. I've got to believe that's a mistake. Focus is everything in the early days, right? Focus, which ends up being focus on an end user persona and a specific set of workflows and use cases. I couldn't agree more.
Back at you will fail. I mean, this is a hard enough market as is. If you're going to sell into it, you have to be all in. I just don't think. Look, there are always exceptions, and if you're capitalized enough, you have the right team, that maybe you can be the exception. But generally, running your business to be an exception is not going to end well for you.
But I mean, even the most well-capitalized of the defense tech kind of upstart new primes, neo primes, whatever they're being called, a company like Anduril isn't dual use, right? They're not selling to enterprise. They're not selling to like major industry. They are selling to militaries, right? And they're extremely well capitalized. So again, different strokes for different folks, I guess.
So I mean, there's always exceptions, right? There are some that I think do this really well. I think with the early stage conversation, it really does become a focus question early on, and I do think you need to go where you're getting watered, right? If you've built a piece of defense tech and you've found that there's this massive commercial market for it, and I have seen companies do this. Go focus there where you can make your money, and over time, as you grow your head count and find you have really stable financials, you can sort of grow back into defense. But I don't think you can build both rocket ships at the same time when you're small, and it is a play of a much more sophisticated company to be able to do a truly dual use technology. Because to be clear, doing defense is a mission focused business, and it requires a certain mindset. It requires absorbing certain risks so that the ultimate winner can be the end user in a way that, commercial customers will never rely on their technology in quite the same fashion.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're totally right. That's like classic startup entrepreneur playbook stuff where, if the ducks are quacking, feed the ducks sort of thing. And that's true for investors. It's also true for the market. You've got to pivot early. In the event that the market signals are such that that's what you need to do. I've got a good friend named Alex Martin, mentor and friend of mine, started a company called ClearSpeed, tried super hard to take this really great technology into U.S. government. It was too difficult, right? He was beating his head on this brick wall and realized that there was a much more compelling and interesting near-term market in the global kind of insurance space. And only now, many, many years later, is kind of re-pivoting or expanding back into defense and national security.
I tried to get Alex in.
It was a bit of a journey.
I
love that. Oh, really?
At CBP,
yeah. At CBP,
and it was, especially at the time, I mean, just too many privacy hurdles, too much civil liberty stuff, and understandably so. Like, you can't play fast and loose with that. But you're right. That was a great example where insurance is like, oh no, we're just gonna, and maybe you could talk to what they do, but like insurance is like, doesn't care. They're like, whatever saves us money and makes underwriting better is what we're gonna do.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think about big players like Applied Intuition, who make autonomy software for dozens of auto manufacturers, but they were founded with a defense focus, and they are still large in the defense space now at this like point in their career. But I think the real like make or break for that company's history was that uptick with private car corporations that needed autonomy software that weren't Tesla.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Well, I keep coming back to the idea that the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, it actually is pretty broad in its authorities, and there's probably a way to leverage current acquisition processes and methodologies and contracting avenues to get done what you want to get done. It's tricky and it can be very complicated, but at the end of the day, defense acquisition on the timeline that it can be reformed is probably not going to save your young companies. So you got to figure it out in the here and now. And so I've been tracking, I don't know how many of the listeners have been, the Atlantic Council has had a kind of multi-year defense acquisition reform and innovation set of commissions. Last week, they broadcast the release of a number of recommendations following a similar commission that occurred a couple of years ago, where they've had, I think, pretty significant uptake from their set of recommendations into the regulation space and Congress and in their efforts to reform and improve and accelerate defense acquisition in the ways that we all kind of hope and dream that it will. a standout comment from a kind of a luminary in the venture capital, defense venture capital ecosystem, Paul Kwan, who's a managing director over at General Catalyst and runs their global resilience practice. He made sure to get the quip in there that investment is not as good as contracts. In other words, like chasing venture capital is actually not the true marker of success. I mean, it can be an enabler, certainly, but like at the end of the day, contracts are the things that you need. And it's not just high ceiling contract vehicles. As much as everybody envies the Go Tennis of the world with a relatively high cap IDIQ contract vehicle, you actually need revenue to come through it, right? You need money to flow through these contract vehicles. So contracts and revenue are the thing. And Paul went on to talk about how the NATO Innovation Fund, which is basically a bunch of public entities contributing dollars or euros or whatever the fuck they use over there, into a common government-backed venture capital fund that would then deploy money into early stage kind of innovative projects. Paul's comment was, if NATO countries had simply awarded $1 billion worth of contracts rather than $1 billion worth of contributions into a public venture capital fund, they would have inspired $3 to $4 billion worth of venture capital activity on the back of actual procurement contracts and R&D contracts. And the message to me and to the industry, I think, should be pretty clear. These government entities need to accelerate time to contract in order to keep the attention of the innovation economy. We're talking about like the creme de la creme of the world's technology talent currently is very interested in solving defense and national security problems. But they'll go back to making the next greatest dating app if there aren't actual meaningful, traction points, revenue, growth in the way that we measure it in the real world. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. That's a little bit of a soapbox diatribe for me, but
I would argue that the DOD is spending $1 trillion every year. There are certainly meaningful contract opportunities going out the door every single year.
I'll just break in there, but I'll just break in there and say DIU's largest contract awards to date, Defense Innovation Unit, the front door for startups. The two largest ones have gone to AeroVironment, a 75-year-old startup. For those who aren't only listening, I'm air quoting startup. No doubt they are a great company, but giving that kind of and that volume of award to a traditional legacy prime contractor might be solving some problems. But the bigger problem of leveraging the economic and innovation engine of the United States and other places, working on this set of problems, you're undermining the effort if those major contracts are going to legacy primes.
There's a bit of a technology versus supplier conversation there, because the vast majority of smalls that have made literally hundreds of billions of dollars from DoD contracts have never won primes of any kind. They've been suppliers and subs. And that is traditionally where small businesses have made fortunes, like true fortunes of wealth. It doesn't have that same attention-grabbing cash of, I won this prime contract, and I get that. But those businesses exist. Anyone who's spent a little bit of time in those congressional trenches gets to know all of the suppliers that exist in your state and all the programs they participate in, and the thousands and thousands of jobs that are made and created on the back of that. I hear the criticism. Like I don't think it's invalid in any way, but you can find a staggering number of companies subsisting on DoD dollars and growing and building on DoD dollars, both venture backed and bootstrapped, all over the country. So I don't think.
But Simon, do you think those are actually primarily venture backed? Like I think the supplier ecosystem are fantastic businesses, like from an EBITDA perspective, but I don't think they're venture backed. They're generally family owned or traditional bootstrapped, right? And I think that's the challenge. I'll let you finish your thought, because there's an interesting, I think, dynamic here on the venture side. So I don't want to cut off that. I apologize.
I know. I mean, it's a great point, and I agree. They are often, family owned, bootstrapped. My question is, are those contracts any less good? Is there a difference between a venture backing a company that is competing with those bootstrapped companies? And I'll say this: a lot of those bootstrapped folks, when they grow, it's often private equity that then comes in and snatches them up.
Well,
that happens all the time.
Well, and I think that's the value arbitrage you see, as a hardware business. Like venture would say it's different. If you are selling SaaS, we can dilute ourselves into 20 to 50x forward multiples. If you're selling hardware, you don't get that. But to your point, there's a lot of, at the end of the day, I don't know about you guys, maybe it's different at Reveal. I pay my employees in real dollars, which it doesn't matter where it came in from. It has to go out as a dollar. Mm-hmm. I wish I could pay them on multiple. So, and look, that's venture.
We pay our employees with monopoly money. Mm-hmm. All right. We pay our employees with monopoly.
We're a vibes-based company.
We're a vibes-based company.
Yeah. That's cool. or Rippets. Is it like, can you like, if you're Coinbase, you can get paid in Bitcoin. If you're at Reveal, you get paid in Ribbit instead of cash. But I think there's a couple of interesting dynamics here. And look, I'm not going to shit on the venture capital system because it's created transformational innovation and wealth. But I do think some of these things come into direct conflict in the defense market in particular. Like, first of all, you have to raise a absolute colossal fuck ton of money to survive in this business. Because whatever your politics are, whatever it is, there's just this constant whipsawing between priorities. There are slow budgets. Last year was the slowest budget to be passed in 11 years. And then, this year we have DOGE is sort of gumming up the works in certain agencies, not all. You have to be capitalized to survive that, or you're dead.
There's a filibuster on the Senate floor of the budget happening right now.
It was a budget or reconciliation? Because budgets,
reconciliation is driven by a budget point of order, right? So this is a part of the budget process. But yeah, Cory Booker's been on the floor all Monday and still is on the floor talking right now.
So you need a ton of money, which means you do have to make raising your priority because the valley of death is immense. You ultimately only make return to your fund, who returns to LPs, which is their actual scorecard, if you're making real contracts. But the reality is, I don't think we found what healthy looks like in VC yet, because the only company that Anduril's the gold standard. And Anduril, look, Trey's on my board, he's amazing. He built that company very deliberately, from every layer of what they did. Most of us can't do that. And on top of that, they've done something which makes total sense, which is, they have raised whatever it is now. Basically, what they've raised versus what they brought in is 2 to 1, right? They've raised far more than they've brought in. That will change, of course. People said the same thing about Palantir. Palantir proved them wrong. But that interim step, only so many companies can run their business that way. Everyone else is going to fail. The financial laws of gravity will kick in. Companies like yours and ours, I think we have to be a little more pragmatic. So I just think all the incentives are misaligned. And I agree with you. Of course, we have to buy stuff faster or we're doomed as a country across the board. But I don't think any VC can put money into a defense-focused company and then be shocked when it takes 3 to 5 years to cross the valley of death. Like, hopefully that gets better. Yeah. But this is not new. We all know this. This is 2 decades of knowing how the government is. Yes, it will get better, but it is for now both a threat, but it's also a moat once you're in. Right.
Yeah. Well, one of the points you're making here, Ari, is that we still don't know if venture capital is actually a good fit for defense innovation, 100%. Right? Like we don't know. There haven't been enough outcomes to say whether it is truly positive or negative. One of the reasons to get big, though, is that all of a sudden you become at some level too big to fail. Right. Like now, if big contracts are not routed to a rising star like Anduril, you'll get, congressional offices across the country are going to get bugged to no end by constituents who are bothering them, right? And complaining and whatever, by the way,
that's not a venture specific phenomena. I mean, you see that with big platforms, aircraft suppliers, like that's just following a proven playbook.
Totally. Well, and I mean, maybe this is one of the reasons why Boeing was given a $20 billion F-47 contract, Is it corporate welfare? Is it, saving a company that was like maybe recently has been taking a bunch of, hits in its operations and its product delivery and its performance? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know.
So hold on, because I want to fight Simon too. So I'll give you the DOD does invest significantly in small businesses, well documented. However, I think the part that your mission is, the overwhelming majority of that spend is services.
Yes.
It is not deployable or fieldable technologies. It is not the type of contracts that are going to get the VC community excited. It is not going to get tangible capability in the field. This is like how we're getting toilet paper to every bathroom on the military installation type contracts, which are no less valuable in our ability to fight and win our nation's wars. The clarification of a very, very small percentage of that is fielded capabilities.
So two things there, one of which is, there's a little bit like of a technology conversation here, right? You say the vast majority of that's not fielded technologies. The M16 is a fielded technology. You don't think of it that way, but it is. It was invented, it was developed, and it is the most important field of tech. Like, it's a thing.
That can't be. You can't claim that was a win.
Yeah, which venture capital? Which early stage?
Hold on. You can't.
Which
early? Don't conflate my
stage
arguments, because I don't like the venture folks. I don't care about. I know you guys do. I don't care about them all, and the main reason I don't care about them all at all is because of what the second point you made, Dave, which is those contracts don't get
many
of them
are on our cap table. I'll just say,
right. Those dollars spend. Those venture firms will get 100% excited when you show up with $100 million of those contracts that don't get them excited. I bet you they will.
Maybe they will, but not really.
No.
The M16 rifle.
No. Hold on. There's a difference in the kind of dollar. There's a difference in the kind of dollar, right? Like, and it's because of the gross margins of the product or the service that you're providing. That is the important thing, and the recurring nature or non-recurring nature of that.
Does the VC care about that? Because I think all they care about is your growth and your exit.
No. VCs care about high margin, repeatable, over time growing lines of revenue. A VC is not going to be interested. Maybe I'm wrong, Ari. Maybe you're closer to this community than I am, and you can channel that spirit and that psychology better than I can. I think they care about long-term, enduring, high margin, automated revenues. Right? They care about SaaS. They care about the ability to.
So then my question would be, why are all of the VC darlings of defense tech hardware? I
think that's an easy one. It's easier to sell hardware than software.
Yeah, no, but it's lower margin. It's not as good by that measure.
No, it's because the U.S. government, the DOD in particular, has decided over time that it doesn't know how to buy software at scale, and so they have to, in their minds, buy full solutions that are either hardware or. Well, they're either hardware or services centric, and then layer in the software. The classic example is Palantir, that basically wins a lot of service contracts and bakes the software license into the total scope of contract, but they're selling a service contract.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a good example.
That was literally the contract that Dave was just telling me that they don't like. Those are no good.
Well, but I think that's where they got the last laugh. Because I think what Palantir did well, and to your point, it was shit on, I think in the 2010s as, that's just a services company masquerading as a SaaS company. But I think the reality was, I think Garrett, you made the point, is the government really struggles to intake new technology, particularly software. I think Palantir actually was very smart to make it, A, look like something they could intake better, but B, realize, and I'm sure you see this with your customers, our customers are fucking busy. They do not have time. We have one of the easiest to use products on the planet. I can use it. I've taught my wife how to use it. Like, my dad uses it. And we still have customers who are too busy needing to execute mission to really delve into it. So we've made services a big part of what we do too. So I think, but this goes back to the point of,
validates my point here.
I'm agreeing with you.
Take those contracts, that's how you get in and produce real life revenues that allow you to then matriculate to these high margin things that ideally we would all love to be doing. But if I have to choose between, I'm waiting for my high margin contract versus I'm showing my VCs my $100 million in services and business interactions, I'm picking it every day.
Yeah, I think Simon, you're just very fun to fight with, which is maybe why I picked up my weapons and started fighting you. But I think
I'm just excited. Right. I'm agreeing with Simon.
So I think Simon and Ari and Dave, you've all brought.
I'm taking this as a W across the board.
No, you're not. No, you're not, because you used one of the poorest procurement examples of all time and called it a W. It took 13 years to realize that was the right soldier weapon. Right, 13 years from Armalite originally designing the car. It is a massive acquisitions failure story of what not to do. So it has all of the ingredients of everything that we complain about.
I think you're hyperfixated on the wrong part of why I use the M16 example, which is there's just things being bought all the time, good, bad, or indifferent, and you don't have to be, I sell this type of thing, and that's where the margins are, and that's what the VCs like. The VCs like the person who makes money. I think that they are way less focused on the color of the money as they are all right, there's more money this year than there was last year at a good clip.
I think you're not completely wrong, but I don't think you're right. But here's where I've landed, is that what we're describing is, what is your on-ramp going to be? Is it raise a bunch of VC dollars so you can extend over the valley of death while you monomaniacally pursue your single product, mission or your multi-product mission? Or are you going to go out and get some services contracts to bridge the gap as you build a thing and eventually monetize over time, either with bigger services contracts or with finally delivering a product, or baking your product into the services contract, as has been demonstrated successfully by Palantir? Or are you going to do it on hardware? I mean, it's really those three things, right? And it can be a hybrid of all of the above, but it's enough VC money to like last over the valley of death, or it's services revenue to, put food on the table while you penetrate, big programs with something better than just a services, line of revenue, or it's hardware, or it's some combination of all three.
Well, the grass grows where it's watered, right? It's the dual use conversation all over again.
Sure.
If one of them is shaking loose in a big way, don't turn your nose up, get after it.
No, I agree. And I think the smart VCs get that for sure. Because to me, it's like, look, if you're taking job shop stuff that takes you off roadmap, that's not helpful. But if you're on roadmap relatively, you're getting that past performance, you're building that reputation with the customer. We all know, the most important thing is the end user operator knowing you and trusting you in this market. However you get that, imprimatur of approval, like that's what you have to do. And to your point, who cares what flavor it is? Sure. Now, there's a transition period there you have to go do. But like to your point, you've got to be building the rep. Your shit has to work, and you can't run out of money in the process. And I think this is just a much harder thing in this space than any others for all the reasons we've covered in this podcast. Like, tomorrow your entire international pipeline could be on hold for 6 months. Well, great.
I think we're going to cap off this discussion with the line, don't run out of money. I mean, it truly is like
it's a great idea not to run out of money.
Don't run out of money. Okay, fellas. Thanks for a lively, at times spicy and productive conversation. Dave, looks like you want to say one more thing. Saved round, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I just have to make a correction. I stated earlier that JTF North was at Fort Huachuca. I had conflated that with a new task force that is Huachuca, focused on the southern border, so that JTF North can keep doing its good work with combating transnational crime and that sort of thing. And it is based out of Fort Bliss, Texas. So I just didn't want to get noted like crazy.
All good. Fort Bliss, Fort Huachuca. Where would you rather be, Dave, if you had to spend like a summer in one of those places?
Huachuca.
Huachuca,
probably Huachuca. Yeah.
100%. I just want to say, as my final note, that if you have notes for Dave, feel free to reach out directly. I encourage everyone to look him up on LinkedIn. Send him a message
on Signal.
On Signal.
Yeah. On Signal. Yeah. On Signal. Ari, thanks for joining us this week. Thank you for spending a bit of time. We'll see you guys on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Ian, for producing a great podcast, and we look forward to chatting with everybody next week. Adios.